At ADX Florence, the most powerful force is not noise, it is silence. Behind reinforced doors, concrete walls, and layers of controlled movement, there is a part of the prison built for men the federal system considers too dangerous, too disruptive, or too difficult to manage anywhere else. This is the control unit, the most restrictive housing inside America's highest security federal prison. Here, freedom is not measured in miles, it can be measured in a few steps, a locked door, a narrow view of the outside world, and the number of human voices heard in a day. The idea behind this place did not appear overnight. It grew from decades of prison violence, escape attempts, and a belief inside the federal system that some prisoners could not be safely controlled in ordinary institutions. One major turning point came in October 1983 at USP Marion in Illinois, where two correctional officers were killed in separate incidents on the same day. Marion entered a prolonged lockdown. Over time, that model of extreme restriction helped shape a new kind of federal prison, one designed around separation, surveillance, and control. In 1994, ADX Florence began operating in Colorado. If stories from places like this pull you into the darker corners of the prison system, subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments how far control should go when maximum security is no longer considered enough. Because inside ADX, the answer is not simple, and the deeper you go, the quieter the world becomes. ADX was designed around a central question: what does a prison do with a prisoner it believes cannot safely live even among other high-security prisoners? The control unit is one answer. According to federal descriptions of the institution, prisoners placed there are housed individually, with movement tightly limited and carefully supervised. Entry into such restrictive housing is tied to serious security concerns, including extreme violence inside prison, escape behavior, or conduct officials believe makes placement in a less restrictive environment unsafe. Daily life is built around control of the smallest things. A door does not open simply because someone wants to walk. Movement happens through schedules, orders, restraints, and supervision. Contact with other prisoners is sharply limited. Meals, recreation, communication, education, medical care, and visits all exist inside a structure that keeps distance between people. The system is designed to reduce opportunities for assault, escape, coordination, or intimidation, but the same structure also creates a life where ordinary human contact becomes rare. A cell becomes more than a room. It becomes the center of existence. Time is spent in the same controlled space, often alone, with routines repeating day after day. Some educational and institutional programming can be delivered through closed-circuit television rather than through ordinary classrooms. Recreation may occur under conditions designed to preserve separation. Visits are generally non-contact. Communication can be monitored and restricted. For prisoners under Special Administrative Measures, or SAMs, those restrictions can become even tighter, especially where authorities believe outside communication could create a serious national security or public safety risk. From the outside, these rules can look mechanical. Inside, they shape behavior. A person learns that every movement matters. Every request travels through a system. Every privilege can depend on conduct, classification, and security decisions. Small choices can carry large consequences. Refusing an order, threatening staff, attempting to pass information, or becoming involved in violence can affect where a prisoner is housed and how much freedom remains inside an already restrictive institution. There is also a hierarchy that is difficult for outsiders to see because it is not based only on reputation among prisoners. At ADX, institutional classification matters deeply. Where a person is housed can reflect how officials assess risk, behavior, communication, and the possibility of violence or escape. The control unit sits at the far end of that spectrum. It is not simply another cell block. It represents the point where the system has decided that ordinary maximum security controls are not enough. That decision carries consequences beyond security. Isolation changes the meaning of time. Without the normal movement of a crowded prison, days can become defined by repetition, meals arriving, doors opening briefly, controlled exercise, television programming, legal work, letters, or the sound of staff moving through a corridor. A person can know that hundreds of others are held within the same complex and still spend much of the day physically separated from them. For staff, the pressure is different but constant. The institution depends on procedures being followed precisely because the prisoners housed there have often been placed in ADX after authorities concluded that ordinary controls failed. A mistake in movement, communication, or supervision can carry serious consequences. The architecture, staffing, schedules, and rules are all built around preventing a small opening from becoming a larger security problem. Yet ADX is not designed only as a permanent endpoint. The federal system has also used step-down programs intended to allow some prisoners to move gradually toward less restrictive conditions if they meet behavioral and security requirements. That possibility creates another form of pressure. Progress can depend on patience, discipline, and the ability to function within rules that offer little room for error. And that is where the hidden tension of the control unit begins. The prison is built to control men considered extraordinarily difficult to control. But the longer a person lives under extreme restriction, the more important another question becomes. What does this level of control do to the person being controlled? The walls can prevent movement, the doors can prevent contact, the rules can reduce opportunities for violence and escape. Inside the most restricted unit at ADX Florence, time becomes part of the sentence in a way outsiders rarely understand. And behind the security logic lies a deeper reality. The system is not only trying to contain dangerous behavior, it is testing whether a human being can endure years of separation without being permanently changed by it. That question follows every locked door inside ADX. Inside ADX Florence, pressure does not always arrive as confrontation. Often, it arrives as repetition. The same door, the same corridor. In the control unit, the system is designed to reduce uncertainty for staff by reducing freedom for prisoners. Days begin to resemble one another, and the smallest changes can take on unusual importance. Every part of the routine is filtered through security. Movement is scheduled and supervised. Communication is limited by policy and classification. Recreation is controlled. Even access to programs may happen without ordinary group contact. The purpose is clear. Limit opportunities for violence, escape, intimidation, or coordinated activity. Yet ordinary social life almost disappears. The prison's hierarchy is different from the one outsiders often imagine. A prisoner may carry a notorious name, but inside ADX, status does not open doors, classification does. Staff decisions determine housing, movement, communication, and access. The structure is built to prevent prisoners from creating their own system of power. Separation is one of the main tools used to weaken that influence. That becomes especially important for prisoners subject to special administrative measures. SAMs can place extraordinary limits on contact with the outside world when federal authorities believe communication could create a serious risk. Phone calls, mail, visits, and other forms of contact may be tightly controlled. The goal is not simply to confine a body, it is to control the flow of information. In an ordinary prison, influence can travel through people, messages can move between units, relationships can carry power across walls. In the most restrictive parts of ADX, the institution attempts to break those chains. A prisoner may be surrounded by concrete, steel, staff, and surveillance, but the real target is often connection itself. For some prisoners, the outside world becomes something experienced in fragments. A letter, a scheduled call, a non-contact visit, news seen through a screen, legal documents, a voice heard after long periods of silence. These moments can become emotional anchors because there are so few of them. A missed call, a delayed letter, or a change in visitation can feel much larger when the rest of life is so controlled. This is where time begins to change meaning. In most places, people divide life by events, workdays, weekends, birthdays, holidays, trips, meetings. Inside extreme restrictive housing, time can become more mechanical. Meals, counts, recreation periods, showers, mail, medical appointments, legal deadlines. The human mind searches for structure. Some prisoners read, write, exercise, study legal material, follow religious practices, or use available educational programming. Federal officials have argued that ADX includes programs and review processes intended to manage prisoners safely, and in some cases, move them toward less restrictive conditions. Critics have questioned whether long periods of isolation can cause or worsen psychological harm. Both realities sit inside the same institution, a security system built for extreme risk and a human environment where extreme restriction carries consequences. The step-down process becomes one of the few visible paths forward. It is designed to reward sustained compliance and allow eligible prisoners to move gradually toward greater interaction and fewer restrictions. But progress is not automatic. Behavior matters, security concerns matter, institutional judgment matters. A prisoner who wants to leave the most restrictive conditions must prove over time that the system can safely loosen its grip. That creates a strange form of discipline. Patience becomes survival. Emotional control becomes practical. A reaction that lasts seconds can carry consequences that last much longer. In a place where privileges are limited, losing even one can matter. A confrontation, a threat, or a refusal can affect how officials assess risk. The system watches patterns, not just moments. For staff, this creates another kind of strain. Officers work in an environment where routine exists because unpredictability is considered dangerous. Procedures are repeated because mistakes can matter. Doors must open in the right order. Movements must be coordinated. Communication must be documented. The prison's design reduces opportunities for sudden disorder, but it also demands constant attention. There is no need for chaos to create tension. The possibility of chaos is enough. The prison does not operate on the assumption that every prisoner will attack, escape, or manipulate others every day. It operates on the belief that some consequences are too serious to risk. Its restrictions are preventive. The institution acts before an opportunity exists. But prevention has a cost. The tighter the system becomes, the less room there is for ordinary human behavior. Trust is replaced by verification. Conversation is replaced by monitoring. Movement is replaced by authorization. Spontaneity disappears, and over time, adaptation begins. A prisoner may become extremely sensitive to routine, because routine is one of the few stable things available. Small disruptions can feel enormous. A different officer, a delayed meal, a canceled movement, a change in schedule, a letter that does not arrive. None of these events would define a normal day outside prison. Inside extreme isolation, they can shape the emotional landscape. This is the hidden pressure of the control unit. The prison is not only controlling dangerous actions, it is narrowing life until almost every meaningful choice fits inside a tightly managed system. That creates a contradiction at the center of ADX Florence. To earn movement toward less restrictive conditions, a prisoner may have to demonstrate stability inside an environment built around deprivation, separation, and control. The system asks for patience from people living in a place where time itself can become difficult to endure. By the end of each day, the doors are still locked, the routines remain, the security mission has not changed, but neither has the question waiting behind it. If a prison removes nearly every opportunity for disorder, what happens when it also removes nearly every opportunity for normal human connection? Inside ADX, that question is not theoretical. It is lived one day at a time, and in the deepest part of the institution, the answer may be more disturbing than the violence the system was built to prevent. The deepest truth about ADX Florence is not found in the thickness of its walls or the number of locked doors. It is found in what happens when control becomes the organizing principle of an entire life. In the most restrictive parts of the prison, security is not one rule among many. It is the rule that shapes every other rule. Where a person stands, when a door opens, who they can speak to, how long they can move, and how they reach the outside world, all pass through the same question. Can this happen without increasing risk? That question explains why ADX exists. The federal government created it to hold prisoners considered exceptionally difficult to manage in ordinary institutions. Some arrived after serious violence in prison. Some had histories of escape or attempted escape. Some were placed under extraordinary communication restrictions because officials believed their words could still carry danger beyond the walls. From the government's point of view, separation is not symbolic punishment. It is a security method. But a method can solve one problem while creating another. Years spent under extreme restriction can change the scale of a person's world. The outside becomes distant. Relationships become harder to maintain. Family members age. Children grow. Parents become elderly. Friends disappear. A prisoner can remain physically alive inside the same building while major parts of life continue without them. A calendar may record the passage of years, but the emotional experience can feel much slower. This is where the human cost becomes impossible to separate from the security mission. Researchers, courts, prison officials, and advocates have argued for years over the effects of long-term restrictive housing. The strongest concerns focus on mental health, social withdrawal, depression, anxiety, and the difficulty some people face when adjusting after prolonged isolation. Not every prisoner responds in the same way, and not every placement lasts the same amount of time. But the debate exists because extreme isolation does more than restrict movement. It changes the conditions under which a person thinks, reacts, and relates to others. That matters when the system expects improvement. The step-down process is built around the idea that some prisoners can move toward less restrictive conditions through sustained compliance and lower security risk. In theory, that creates a path. In practice, the path can be demanding. The prisoner must show stability inside an environment that may itself make stability harder to maintain. A short burst of anger can damage progress. A threat can reshape a classification decision. A refusal can become part of a larger record. In a prison built around risk, behavior is remembered. This does not mean the rules are meaningless. They are responsible for people who may have histories that make ordinary supervision dangerous. The institution cannot simply assume that everyone will follow directions because conditions become more comfortable. Its purpose is to prevent violence, escape, intimidation, and dangerous communication before those things happen. So ADX lives inside a permanent tension. Too little control can create risk. Too much control can create harm. Between those 2 points is a system trying to decide how much restriction is necessary, how long it should last, and when a person has changed enough to be trusted with more freedom inside prison. Those decisions are rarely dramatic. They happen through reviews, reports, behavior records, security assessments, and long stretches of ordinary compliance. There may be no single moment when a prisoner suddenly becomes safe. Instead, staff look for patterns. Months matter. Years can matter. One decision may not change anything immediately, but repeated decisions can eventually determine whether a prisoner remains in the same conditions or moves forward. For the prisoner, this creates a different kind of pressure. Survival is not only avoiding physical conflict, it is learning how to live inside a system where reaction itself can become evidence. Anger must be managed. Frustration must be contained. Boredom must be endured. Contact with family must be protected. Routine becomes a tool for staying functional. And yet the future remains uncertain. Some prisoners may eventually leave the most restrictive conditions. Some may transfer to other institutions. Others may spend extraordinarily long periods inside highly controlled housing. The outcome depends on security status, behavior, legal circumstances, and institutional judgment. That uncertainty is one of the hardest parts to understand from outside. A sentence tells a person how much time the law has taken. A restrictive unit determines what that time feels like. Inside ADX Florence, those are not the same thing. The prison can count days with perfect accuracy. It cannot measure what those days become inside a person's mind. It cannot fully calculate the cost of a relationship reduced to monitored communication. It cannot put a number on the experience of watching the world change from behind layers of security. And it cannot avoid the question that has followed Supermax prisons from the beginning. When does protection become something else? There is no simple answer. The government can point to the dangerous behavior that led to these restrictions. Critics can point to the human consequences of prolonged isolation. Staff can point to the responsibility of keeping an institution safe. Prisoners can point to years spent in conditions most people will never experience. All of those realities can exist at the same time. That is what makes the control unit at ADX Florence more than a story about notorious prisoners or extreme architecture. It is a story about the limits of punishment, the limits of security, and the difficult line between containing danger and preserving human dignity. The most restricted unit in the federal prison system was built to make chaos almost impossible. What remains is something quieter. A human being, a locked door, time, and the question of what survives after years of control. Because at ADX, confinement is measured not by space, but by silence and repetition. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, and keep looking beyond the walls.